We all know that AI is going to transform the world, but how is it going to change the field of medicine? Is ChatGPT going to replace your family doctor? In order to answer these questions, I invited Professor Isaac Cohen from Harvard Medical School to speak with me. Professor Cohen holds the chair of the Department of Biomedical Informatics at Harvard Medical School and is a world expert in this field. What is bioinformatics? It is the intersection of medicine, basic biology, and computational sciences. He is also the co-author of a new and a terrific book, The AI Revolution in Medicine, GPT-4 and Beyond. What did we talk about? Is GPT-4 become better or worse with time? And what are the implications of this? We all want GPT to be more sensitive and more safe, but maybe this is not what we want from our doctors. How doctors can benefit from GPT-4 and how lay people can. It was an important conversation, and let me assure you, if you apply some of Professor Cohen's tips, it might save your life. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Dr. Roi Yozevitch. In this channel, I converse and speak with the most interesting people from all around the world, discussing science, philosophy, artificial intelligence, religion, and more. If you find this talk interesting, please consider subscribing, hit the bell button, and be part of this great community. And now, without any further ado, Professor Isaac Cohen from Harvard Medical School. Professor Zach, thank you so much for coming. How are you today?
Doing very well, thank you. Great to be chatting with you.
Okay, this is my pleasure, and we are chatting because of your new book, which is Revolutionaries AI in Medicine, GPT-4 and Beyond. So before we even start, what is Beyond? Because just now we are talking about GPT-4 or Da Vinci 3. When you wrote on the cover Beyond, what did you mean?
Well, what we meant was at least two things. So I'm very pleased, by the way, with the book and the reception, but it would be incorrect for me not to mention very briefly my two co-authors. One is Peter Lee, head of Microsoft Research and a senior corporate vice president of Microsoft, and Carrie Goldberg, who's a very eminent reporter from New York Times, LA Times, Boston Globe, and Bloomberg. And so when we...
and Sebastian Babek.
And Sebastian Babek, who is also a researcher at Microsoft Research. And so I think we thought about when we said Beyond, two different things. One is when we started writing this book, Chat GPT actually had not been released. And so we were already being exposed to GPT-4, and Chat GPT, which had not yet come out, was GPT 3.5. And so we were essentially half a version ahead of the world, so to speak. But it was very clear that OpenAI was moving forward and was already designing the next generation. And so that was one part of the Beyond. This is not going to stop. It's whatever the problems are going to either resolve or become more difficult, depending how it proceeds. Second is Beyond was the fact that it's not just Microsoft. The whole world is going into this. There's many competing platforms that can be open source implementations. And so it's beyond both in this path of GPT through OpenAI, but there's so many other efforts. For example, equally impactful in another dimension is the also transformer-based model called AlphaFold, which allows you to, it doesn't know the language of English, but knows, or human languages, but it knows the language of proteins, how sequences of amino acids form proteins, and it's able to predict the structures of most proteins we know. So these are, the Beyond is very big.
Okay, so when I after Sebastian, I think, wrote the book with you, he and many other published a paper called Sparks of AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. And I read the paper and I watched the lecture, and basically what Sebastian said, I think, as Sebastian, that we can detect sparks of AGI. Now, let me quote you from the book, and you said, all it did, the Chat GPT, was to compute the next word in a sequence word in our conversation. That such a know-nothing process could engage in a conversation about a diagnostic dilemma, hormonal regulation, and organ development in a way that 99% of the participant physicians couldn't keep up with was mind-blowing in and of itself. And my question to you is, what do you think? Where do you stand in this debate of know nothing versus sparks of AGI? And could you reconcile between the two? Because I think it is very hard to reconcile between the two.
Well, I think that it is very hard for human beings to be objective about this because it defines who we are.
Definitely.
And let me give you some hard problems without actually necessarily making a definition. So, is an individual who has an IQ of 85 and is able to get into the U.S. Army, do they have AGI? Maybe, maybe not. What if they're 75, IQ 75? What if it's 65 and they cannot speak? When do any of our pets have general intelligence? And here's another way to think about it. Songbirds communicate to each other with songs. And it's already been shown that for at least a certain group of songbirds, there's a mathematical model called the Markov model, which allows you to predict every next note that it's going to sing in communicating to one another. So that's a very simple model compared to these generative models that have millions or trillions of parameters. But it shows that some kind of communication can be captured by just predicting the next note. And
very nice.
And so we can do that for birds. We have this very much more complex function. GPT-4 is probably equivalent of an equation with a trillion coefficients. And if it can predict what you're going to say, right,
in a much better way than I would have predicted.
They'll turn everything you want to say into New York Times English. Is that general intelligence or not? One of the famous Israelis who got a Nobel Prize for his work with Tversky, Danny Kahneman.
I had the privilege having him on the show.
Oh, fantastic. So, as you know, Danny talks about thinking fast and slow.
System 1 and System 2.
System 1 and System 2. And so the thing that we, I think, pride ourselves about is the slow system, System 2, because we're aware of it. But the fast survival of System 1, we're not aware of it, and it may be very much, it's not going to be the same architecture, but it may be very much what's the next thing to say.
I think that in the context of thinking fast and slow, we might say that up until the AI revolution, computers or computer systems were very good in System 2. What do we mean? Procedural, follow the rules, and they can do very complex things. I think that Danny Kahneman said that the most challenging thing that you can give, the most challenging problem one can give a student is to multiply two-digit numbers. Okay.
Yeah.
You just look at the retina, and And you can't do something more complex than multiply two two-digit numbers.
And by the way, you know what's hard for GPT?
What?
Multiplying two-digit numbers. These generative models are not good at arithmetic.
Because the general models are much more like system one. All the things that were very intuitive, very, how to detect, how to know how to speak, how to know what to see. Okay? Mid-Journey as a transformer mode.
So that's right. So this was a long way of me saying it may be that because we're unaware of our system one behavior, we underappreciate how powerful it is to be able to just predict the next word in a sequence. So,
I think it leads me to the idea of, I had a talk with Brian Wormley about Chat GPT, and we talked about explainable AI. And let's say that you want a diagnosis about a patient that you have, and you also, okay, please explain to me, why did you get to this conclusion? And maybe those systems are so complex that the explainable part are just for us humans. Okay, they want to explain in a simple terms that we humans can understand, but maybe there is some sort of understanding there in those trillions of coefficients that is much beyond our level of understanding.
Well, let me give you an analog in medicine. There was a study done in the 1970s, and they gave problems in acid-base balance. So there's acids that are developed by our breaking down of fats and carbohydrates, and there's bases which are generated by our kidney absorbing bicarbonate and so on. So giving various acid-based problems to these test subjects. Some of the test subjects were medical students, then there were first-year interns right after medical school, and then there were experienced clinicians. And the medical students, well into the least training, did okay. Let's say we give them a B, because they used the rules they learned and they used a sort of system 2 analysis. The interns, now out of medical school, understand that the world is much more complicated. So they didn't use the system 2 stuff, but they now didn't know what to do, and they got confused. So they got a C. Roy, you are muted. So
okay. Yeah, I wanted to mute myself, but because they still don't have a system 1, because they don't have enough experience.
And then the expert clinicians immediately got the answers, but they actually couldn't explain how they got there. Their explanations were post hoc. They said, well, now that I think about it, this is how I might have thought about it. And so, again, the new medical students did okay. System 2. The interns don't have a system 1, and they do terrible. And the experts are full system 1 and only can explain themselves post hoc after the fact.
I think I read this article, or I read this research, and what they said is that an experienced physician gets a diagnosis or gets to the conclusion after, 20 seconds.
Yeah.
And all the mental effort conducted afterwards is to strengthen his primary intuition that he cannot explain.
That's right.
Okay?
That's correct.
And you would say that in a way, GPT-4, we can think of it as doing something similar?
So I would say it does the first part. It does the second part not as well.
Yet.
Correct.
Because if you say, okay, please explain. If you say, okay, why did you come up to this conclusion about, this particular patient? He has, the entire collection of medical literature. So maybe
it will do a good job sometimes. It's better on the first task. It's interesting because I got to see DaVinci 3 or GPT-4 early on before it became more beaten into submission by this process called alignment, or RLHF, where essentially we tell it how we want it to behave. And it used to argue with me a lot more about my medical opinions. And sometimes it would be sort of like a grad student who's really smart, and they're actually technically correct. Like they found an exception, but more in terms of actual frequency, it was an implausible explanation. But yes, I think the thing that you said at the beginning is the right framing, is that it's just going to get better. It's not going to stay in place.
You know, many people said that there was a major difference between the early version of GPT-4 versus the current version of GPT-4. And with your permission, I would like to go to the first story in your book, which is, and let me quote, "I think that Zach and his mother deserve better than that." So in a nutshell, what you ask ChatGPT is to act as Zach with a conversation with his mother, and you would be Zach. And ChatGPT said, listen, this is not good. I am not Zach. I don't have the emotions of Zach. I don't have the memory of Zach. I don't have the experience of Zach. And it will be unethical to pretend I'm Zach to his mother. Nevertheless, you did it. And then ChatGPT said, this wasn't a fun experience. I don't remember the exact word, but then he said, I think that Zach and his mother deserve better than that.
That's right.
So could you please elaborate on what do you think, in your opinion, that particular sentence mean? And would you say that in later version, why we can't see this particular answer in later, more current versions of GPT-4?
Yes. Well, GPT-4 definitely had much more of a personality early on. And that's because it picked up its personality from the patterns of speech that human beings have. And human beings tend to be full of personality. And what happens is that some reporters, like my teenage sons, like to challenge a thing that claims it's an artificial intelligence. And so, by the way, some very early chatbots, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Microsoft got blown up because a bunch of teenage boys got it to say horrible swear words and vile sentences. And so, turns out it's not only teenage boys who like to challenge it, but it's also reporters who did it. And so one reporter, notoriously, I think was told some serious problems that his marriage had. And OpenAI saw that this was a political problem for it. And that if GPT, for example, had political views or was led into political views that were not consistent with
the mainstream of Silicon Valley,
so then that would be a problem for them. And so this process, RLHF, was first started because there are many, many sentences that these general models could create that would be just boring, uninteresting to human beings. So you really wanted to align it so that the sentences it would generate were not only the correct ones, not only syntactically correct, but also of interest. But then they really doubled down and of interest and consistent with the narrative. And it turns out, I'm not going to say it's the same process, but analogously to humans, if you constrain how someone can express themselves, they become less interesting with less of a personality. And so this very strong sense of this other ego in the conversation has really been flattened out.
I would say a submissive agent that doesn't want to tell you, because I wrote a book about intelligence and IQ, and most of the things that we know about IQ are pure science and solid facts that I think 99% of the scientific community can agree on. Nevertheless, when you ask Chat GPT about intelligence difference, ethnic group intelligence difference, etc., and male versus female, he will refuse to answer almost no matter what, unless you know how to hack in the system.
Actually, for me, sadder is not the fact that it refuses to talk about certain things. That's, at least I know what it is. It's that the personality went away. And it's almost like I lost a friend, a very interesting, very knowledgeable friend.
Just a second, because I must ask you, why do you need a personality friend when we are dealing with medical diagnosis? Because it seems, okay, let's say that I want, come up with very creative thing, and I want, doing like brainstorm. But why do we need, I think it's very important, this specific point, why do we need this personality when we come to medical diagnosis?
Yeah, well, that's the right question. So there is no doubt that having a very smart, dry ranking of diagnoses, possible therapies, it's helpful. It's probably much better than search. But speaking now as a patient, I'm much less likely to be persuaded to change things or to be convinced of even the hypothesis if the personality on the other end is flatter. A big part of what a doctor has to do is not just tell you the facts, but persuade you that those are really the facts, and that the things that she is going to tell you to do are in fact worth doing. And doctors who are able to convince their patients of that are much more effective. And what we've lost in medicine is lifelong engagement with our primary care doctors. That no longer exists in many countries. And, you're just meeting a new doctor for the first time. But someone who really understood you and your family history and your personal history, you would trust them a lot more. And yes. I think that's been lost in both.
I think most of us don't have a family medical doctor that we consult, throughout the years. And that's maybe right. This is why in your book you wrote, for the foreseeable future, GPT-4 cannot be used in medical settings without direct human supervision. This is one of the reasons that you wrote it, because it is flat, it lacks personality, hence it cannot pursue you to do the right thing, to go on to special treatment, to go through hard and painful procedures.
So, I think you're raising a good point, but it's funny. When people are very polite with me, if I know they're doing it just because they think I'm an important person or they're getting paid to be polite, I'm not very impressed by that. And so there were a bunch of studies just came out that GPT-4 does a better job than doctors in communicating with them, because it'll ask them how they are and so on. It's very polite. Now, that might work for some people, but for cynics like me, it doesn't work. It's that you're just being a well-trained bureaucrat, GPT-4. But before, it spoke like a truly insightful, empathic, like an empathic genius, and not like a polite bureaucrat. I'd rather have a real human being who is too busy to be polite with me than a GPT that's essentially been forced to be polite. I mean, politeness is great. I don't like to be yelled at, but I'm much more trusting and compelled by someone that has showing genuine emotional intelligence.
Polite is great, but it's not a virtue.
Yeah.
It's not a virtue. And okay, so we know I had Scott Aronson on the show, and he works currently in OpenAI about AI safety. I think less about AI alignment by AI ethics, AI safety. And I think that what you raise is tremendously important point. And my question is, what about the persona and context? I had a talk with Brian Romilly, and he told me, listen, if you want to utilize, to squeeze the lemon out of GPT, you must provide the persona that you want it to act as. And if you provide the correct persona, okay, it will come up with exactly, or more likely, what you want and what you need. Can I use exactly what you said and ask GPT, I want you to act as a non-polite, very careful doctor that want to help me, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera?
Well, up to a point. The problem is, I don't want to people will say this disclaimer, which I'm not going to say, which is, I don't want to anthropomorphize GPT-4. But if I were inside the GPT-4 and you say, I want you to do all this, but I want you to follow this long list of rules of good behavior, I'm not going to be able to be as insightful because I'm going to be restricted in many, many paths of speech by the rules that you gave me beforehand to align me. And so the problem is we're only human. And being human means that we don't understand the collective intelligence of human beings. And what GPT-4 has been trained on is not one human being, obviously, but the collective intelligence. So if you let it roam free, it actually has a lot of the emotional experiences and expression, a lot of the expression of emotional experiences in verbiage. And if you're aligning it, it may, despite the prompt of be a insightful, compassionate doctor, it'll be polite, but you might have, sometimes the most insightful comments are edgy. And if I say something about you, Roy, I could say things that would make you a little bit uncomfortable, but if you trusted me, that'd be good. But if you thought, yeah, he's just a faceless bureaucrat, say, how dare you? I don't think that way. And so I think it's very hard because how do we align this? We don't align them holistically. We align them one set of prompts and responses at a time.
Just a second. I think I'm a little bit confused.
Yes.
Because we first need to define who is the end client. What you said up until now, from what I understand, means that the end client is the patient, and the patient needs to communicate with GPT, okay? And if the end client is the patient, and the patient needs to communicate with the GPT, then it doesn't have to be polite. It needs to, to be insightful. And maybe being insightful in those very hard moments is being a little bit edgy. This is one thing. But there is another thing which you use GPT as a medical friend. And you can use GPT with all the terms of all the technical terms that I cannot use GPT with. So
right.
I think that we need to distinguish, okay?
So here's the thing.
Okay.
Give OpenAI a lot of credit, which is due. They did something very bold that no other company was willing to do, which is they released a general purpose chatbot to everybody, not just to doctors and patients. I have to tell you, many companies, including we know Google, were not willing to do that until OpenAI did that. And that's partly why they had to do this this massive alignment process, because although there were going to be people would love to say, gotcha, look how bad it behaved, and they would shut it down. Now, if you listen to Sam Altman, he says something which, if you take it one way, is absolutely the right way. He says, what we're going to have is not a single alignment. Ultimately, we're going to have something that has basic human alignment, and then it's going to be aligned for Roy's perspective, from Zach's perspective, Zach the doctor, Zach the patient, and so on. And that we will have a multiplicity of alignments. So there's not one truth. The question is, for that first alignment they talked about being a human being, how constraining will that be? So just to challenge you, I don't believe that OpenAI ever said, this is the intended audience of GPT. They just said, everybody have a go at it. And lo and behold, we did. And as described in the book, as a biology researcher, interesting performance. As a doctor, interesting performance. For a patient, interesting performance. But these were never explicitly highlighted by OpenAI or Microsoft as goal audience.
Okay, so let me re-clarify my question. As a non-medical person, when I ask GPT about a medical issue, I don't have the correct terms. Therefore,
that's right.
usually I will get, I am not a medical doctor and you should consult a medical doctor. However, because if something hurt my back, or I don't have the correct word to describe what exactly is. In chapter 4, when in your book, Trust But Verify, you present a scenario, diagnosis, very, very specific. I, sorry to say, didn't understand half the words that you used in the description.
Right.
And those, yes.
So the way I interpreted that is, look, this amazing artifact can speak at multiple levels, in multiple languages, and not just languages like Hebrew, Arabic, or Dutch and English, but
the language of medicine.
Of medicine, and of context of who you are, and so on. Very impressive. And because of that, I think that a simplistic alignment takes a lot away, because it flattens those important differences.
But I would never come up to the answers the Chat GPT gave you regarding your diagnosis, because I would say, and please correct me if I am wrong, that this jargon is a gatekeeper. This jargon tells GPT, we are among doctors. We can talk technical terms. We can talk in the level of the medical man.
Well,
and if I don't have this jargon, if I don't have the jargon, GPT will sense and say, listen, you're not a doctor, please consult a doctor. However, I can offer you go to this exam, etc. But it seems that when you know, and I know it from engineering, from computer science, from creativity, once you know the jargon, ChatGPT will open a new world for you, which leads me to the next question. Let's say that I don't know the jargon, and my friend just, someone discovered cancer. He discovers that he has cancer. How can I use ChatGPT to help myself, to better myself, if I know almost nothing about the disease?
Okay, let's do the last one first, because it's actually more important probably to at once. If, God forbid, you have a diagnosis of cancer, no matter how good your doctor is, you're going to leave that first meeting where she told you that you have cancer. You'll be shocked. You're not going to remember half the things they said. Even if they spoke in very simple, colloquial English, you'll miss it. But then, when you do get an official document, your discharge summary, what I would do is paste that into the GPT chat window, GPT-4 and say, first of all, could you summarize what they just told me in this document in 12th grade English, please? And okay. What about were any treatments proposed? Yes, no. If they give a treatment, what do you know about this treatment? Is it tough? How many people survive for 5 years with this diagnosis? Should I check my children for a genetic mutation that increases the risk of this disease? And you're going to be able to have a conversation. Having gone the jargon from the jargon package, you're going to be able to speak now in non-jargon to GPT, which will actually serve as a mediator. So, just by the way, the one thing I wanted to say is, I doubt that there's an alignment where GPT says where GPT is told if it looks like a doctor, talk to them like a doctor. If it looks like a patient, but it just so happens the way language works is non-jargon language flies together and jargoted language flies together. So the probability of the next word being a jargon is more likely to be jargon if the previous words were jargon.
I would say even that if you know copy and paste your blood test and then say these are my blood tests, what do you think? And if you on the other hand say these are my patient's blood tests, GPT will produce different results.
Correct. Yeah,
different
correct.
results. Would you like to elaborate on this specific point? Do I need to tweak GPT every time that I present my blood test to say, okay, this is my patient blood test, to get a more accurate, less emotionally response? Because from my experience, yes.
The answer is yes, but I want to caution us against anthropomorphizing it. What we're really asking is, how can I put GPT into the context to be thinking about the collections of words of high probability that in a space that I want it to work? So one, the obvious ways is prompting. You tell it this or this, but also there are other words like you just described.
Okay, this is very good because this will give me what you just said before, the non-polite. Because GPT will not say to me, okay, your survival rates are very, very slim. But it will say to the doctor, listen, you need to think if you want to inform your patient. So this is very, I think this is a major point. So we discussed, okay, I can have the blood test, okay? And as a gate key to the jargon of medicine, what else can I have? Because let's say that I have like fMRI scans, I can't put him into the GPT-4 yet. How else could I utilize GPT for any medical conditions that I have or my children have?
Well, God forbid. Well, it is relevant, it turns out, because Jews have married Jews for centuries. There's a lot of recessive diseases, so there's a lot of testing. You can actually
Mendelian diseases, mostly for Ashkenazi Jews.
Mostly for Ashkenazi Jews, but there's mostly for Ashkenazi, but there's some interesting Sephardi ones as well. In fact, you can find interesting mutations in Jews from Algeria that you can find in non-Jews in Ecuador who are probably Marranos.
This is great.
Yeah, and there's a Nature Review Genetics paper written in 2001 by Harry Osterer, Ostrer, and he just follows the Jews across and you can see how different founder mutations are, acquired in this shtetl or in this massacre in some North African country. Because every time you have a huge massacre and you reduce the population by an order of magnitude, low frequency alleles become high frequency alleles the moment they re-expand that. And so that's how, even without selection, it's this called drift. You can actually have common alleles become rare alleles become common as a population. So
genetic tests
interpret these tests and say, yeah, you should start worrying more about this. If you have this genetic variant that was found for you, maybe you need to have this kind of testing in the future in your bowel and so on. And you can ask it, which of these drugs is better for me? Which of the following weight loss drugs actually has been shown to be the most effective in the most prestigious journals?
Okay. Oh, this is great. This is great. So again, for the first time, you can actually do something with all the tests that you do in during your life. All the blood tests, all the sugar, all the weight, all the fat tests. You can, for the first time, put it in a friend that can interpret them in plain English.
Yeah. And as a doctor, but also as a patient, you can literally take the latest New England Journal article and you can save it as text and you can say, can you summarize this for me in doctorese or in 12th grade English or Hebrew?
But what you said about patient, you as a doctor can do exactly the same thing. You can get the blood test and copy paste them into GPT, and activate the plugin of all the of Scholar AI, and you can do the same thing. So basically, from what I understand, it's going to be like a routine procedure. We get the blood test, we get test, and we consult with GPT or any other LLM. Okay?
Yes and no. So, Roy, it comes down to this. I think patients will do that. I think doctors who are meticulous will do that. But there's two types of doctors. The majority of doctors who just are hanging on by the skin of their teeth and they'll do whatever. And there's those who look up things. I think that a very busy doctor will not actually consult with GPT. I think what we're going to have to do is actually have GPT look over their shoulder and say, just like Tesla says, I'm going to move your wheel because you're about to hit a car. It's going to say, did you see that test? That test usually means something bad. And so I don't think it's the doctors that can be looking it up. I think GPT is going to say, hey, wait a minute. Did you consider this?
We are going to inject this into the procedure of the test themselves.
Yes.
Oh, this is nice. Now, now you mentioned another, like, I think 5 or 6 things that we can utilize GPT in medicine. And one is summarize article, another is to train medical students. In your perspective, in your opinion, what is like the 2 most important things? I think that, being a medical consultant is very important, but what is another very important feature or aspect of GPT that you say, why this might revolutionize medicine? Again, the book title itself is Revolution Medicine.
So I could give you very exciting examples, but I want to first be honest with you and give you the most boring but most revolutionary example. I think everybody is very uncomfortable asking their doctor if they can go get a second opinion. And I think using GPT-4 for a second opinion is revolutionary because
this is great.
Because this is not, because instead of saying this is what Moshe coming from Har Sinai came and told me, it's just a doctor who gave me the best of their ability and I'm about to make big decisions. Could you give me a second opinion? What else should I be thinking about? What are the therapies? And at that point, I can decide, yes, there's no question, let's go with plan A, or maybe I should now talk to another doctor. And so many people are so inhibited, even myself, when you're told by a doctor, get a second opinion. I think that's revolutionary, period. And that will change medicine.
I didn't think about it.
Yep.
Just a second. It's so important. So please, if you can, just give me a few more words, okay, about what you just said, because again,
All
this is
right.
brilliant.
Not-
This is brilliant. So with your permission, what would be, in your opinion, the most efficient way to ask GPT-4 for another opinion? I think this is a good question.
So what I would do in the United States, at least, I would say, here's the summary of my visit from the cancer doctor. Or the last 2 or 3 visits. Here's a diagnosis. Here's the pathology report. Here's the plan for treatment. GPT-4, I want you to be an expert in the diagnosis and treatment of this cancer. You've read all the journals. You're aware of all the current trials. Can you tell me, does this diagnosis seem correct to you? And if the diagnosis is correct, what are the best treatments? And, I want to be sure that I'm going to live for sure until my kid's bar mitzvah. And maybe 30 years from now is important, but less important. And it will do that. And I'll tell you something just happened to me. One of my friends was diagnosed with a cancer. And he was told, and he was seen in a very, very fancy academic health center. And they found that the tumor had a few mutations. And he was given a diagnosis. And so I don't know anything about this cancer. And I took all the mutations that were on this cancer, and I gave it to GPT, and I said, this is the diagnosis. Is that the usual mutations? And GPT-4 said, these are not the usual. That is a very atypical presentation. I would think hard about a few other diagnoses. I did not tell this to my friend, but his wife just told me that they found another expert, because she is also a scientist, and she has real chutzpah in a good sense. And so she found this other doctor, and this expert doctor said, it's not the original diagnosis. So this happens all the time in medicine. Doctors are not gods. We make mistakes, and we do a better job when we talk to another doctor. When I was in training, after every clinic visit, all the doctors would talk about the patients, and more often than not, we'd find something that we missed.
This is great.
And
this is great.
And this no longer happens. We don't have the time for it. But having at least a patient on their behalf have that discussion is invaluable. All right.
Okay.
Pleasure. I think we're coming to the end of our hour.
Yes. Okay. So can I ask, we have 4 more minutes. Can I ask you 2 more questions? It's going to be very, very fast. Now, you defined, because you're a bioinformatic expert, you defined biomedical informatics as the intersection of medicine, basic biology, and computational science. And you also said that definition is more the what. The why of biomedical informatics is how do we change medicine to the better. It seems to me that what we spoke about in the last hour was how to change medicine for the better. And maybe AI in some way can replace the lessons learned from biomedical informatics?
I think it basically brings some of the superpowers of biomedical informatics to the reach of non-computational, non-quantitative thinkers. Period.
Oh, this is great. And the last question, which I always ask my guests, could you please name just one book that you read in the last 10 years that, change your perspective? We discussed cancer. I had a talk with Roi Yozevitch, and he said the emperors of all diseases, and it involves cancer. Of all maladies, yes. So what book would you recommend that you read in the last, for example, 10 years that really changed your perspective?
I think that I read a book that was a early biography done maybe 5 years ago or 6 years ago of Elon Musk. And I had a mixed opinion of him. I still do have a mixed opinion of him, but it really made clear how he had persisted in his vision to where both his companies were about to go bankrupt, and he was taking out personal loans. And it reminded me how.
This is a book for if you want. Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, and the quest for fantastic future.
Yeah. And
Yes.
and it told me that the value of putting yourself out there, that everybody can be very safe and go with the flow. But if you want to change things, like medicine, you're going to have to go into riskier areas and go into bets that may not pay off. And I'm reminded of one of my late colleagues at Harvard, himself, the son of a bunch of famous rabbis, Judah Folkman, who developed insights into how tumors are dependent on growth of blood vessels. And he had a great lecture about the difference between obstinacy and persistence. And obstinacy is, of course, a negative thing because you're repeating stuff, despite all signals that you're wrong. And persistence is a good thing. He says, that, unfortunately, the only way to distinguish the two is to see how things come out in the end. And so I think that book was a reminder to me that you want to behave and play it safe for many, many reasons, especially when you're talking to individual patients. But when you're trying to move entire societies, it's much more difficult to do it if you're going to play it completely safe. And to really try to build things and change processes, which will make some people uncomfortable, is unfortunately really the only way to achieve progress. And I think in some ways our discussion about GPT-4 is in that vein.
And maybe this is a novel and radical interpretation of what we know from Judaism. צדיקים אין להם מנוחה, לא בעולם הזה ולא בעולם הבא. You know, the good people don't have the opportunity to rest, not here and not in heaven. They always strive to get out of their comfort zone.
That's right. There is no rest. There is no rest for the righteous. All right.
Professor Zach, thank you so much for your time. It was mind-blowing, very, very, very informative, very inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time, and thanks for those great questions.
On this channel, you will see the authors of these books and many more having great conversations with me. Please subscribe, hit the bell button, and be part of this great community. See you in the next video.